one of the protagonists in the story of The Invisible Enemy Should Not Exist appears in the last series of drawings. Dr. Donny George Youkhanna was the president of the Iraq State Board of Antiquities and Heritage, and he was also the Director General of the Iraq Museum. And so in the aftermath of the looting, he was one of the heroes who really started to kind of put together the task forces and all the information in trying to retrieve whatever he could. And he actually, along with an international cohort of different researchers and also even soldiers, was able to retrieve close to half of the 15,000 artifacts that were looted. And as I became more familiar with his story, I learned that in order to avoid Ba'ath Party meetings, he did something that most directors of museums don't do, which is to participate directly on the excavations. And so he would telegraph back to Baghdad that something important had been found in some place and that he couldn't come to the meetings. So that kind of circumvention of authority interested me. It also spoke to how difficult it was for someone like him as an Assyrian Christian to hold that level of office. And so being a member of the party was essential. Also, Dr. George sidelined as a drummer in a band called 99%, which is short for 99% of Excellence, that specialized in covers of Deep Purple and Pink Floyd songs. And this was the part of the story where I really developed quite a lot of affection for him, not just because I'm a rock and roll fan, but also this really just casts such a kind of human side of his story, where you understand also that those supposed dividers of East and West don't exist. And so what we have here as a kind of final layer, is this atmospheric aspect, which is the soundtrack to the project. It's a cover of Deep Purple's Smoke on the Water that I commissioned from an Arabic band in Brooklyn called Ayub. So instead of guitars and bass guitars and drums and everything else, there's also oud and bouzuk and kanun and all these other instruments that are being played that gives it this mood and attaches itself to the story of Donny George to kind of imagine what that might have been like for 99% to be performing in Baghdad. And one of the moments that was really lovely was when the show opened in New York. I had become friends with Donny George by this time through a mutual contact, and he arrived and saw that the show had this component about him that was very much celebrating his biography and his efforts. And the thing that he was the most interested in was, how did I get a picture of him playing the drums? And his response, my response to him was that because there's no YouTube videos or MP3s or Google images of him playing the drums, or any of the songs even being available to listen to online, I had to reconstruct that, through like a picture of him looking bored at a meeting, and then a picture of Ringo Starr, and then that all kind of like distills down to this image. And when he saw that I was faking it in order to produce something for people to kind of understand as something that actually did happen, but it wasn't documented, he said, well, that's archaeology too. And then the thing that for me is almost the most poignant part of this project as something that is viewed happened right after the show opened in New York. I'm always interested in the way that people stand and they study the objects, and so I almost feel like the project is not complete without viewers, studying closely these objects. And I live in Chicago, and I wasn't there in New York when he visited the exhibition. And what I received in my email was the greatest gift from my gallery, which were these pictures of him looking at the artifacts. But he wasn't just looking at the artifacts. It turned out he had stayed in the gallery for hours with the project. And as viewers came in, as these gallery goers came in, he gave tours of the artifacts on the table the same way that he would have given tours of the artifacts in his museum back in Baghdad. And so the thing that that's important to say in all of this was that Donny George had to leave Iraq, as many Iraqis had to, as a refugee. And so he had received a letter with a bullet from extremists who threatened to harm his family if a ransom was not paid. And so he ended up for 6 months in Syria, during which time the State University of New York at Stony Brook made arrangements for him to come and teach as a visiting professor in the Department of Anthropology. And like many of these artifacts that end up in these third-party countries after they're found, in places like Japan or Italy or Kuwait or even the United States, they end up having to stay there, cradled in those third-party countries, because it's too dangerous for them to go back, which is a lot like the story of the refugees. And we can talk about that now as being the best case scenario for the refugees, because now we're not even sure what are the third-party countries that will take them in. And so he became very emotional. Donny George became very emotional when he saw the artifacts. And when I asked him about why, he said, "This is probably as close as I'm ever getting to them again." And that ends up being doubly tragic, because in 2011 he ended up passing away. He passed away in 2011 as a result of a massive heart attack that he had while traveling to Toronto. And so he didn't even die within a country. He died stateless in that zone between the United States and before getting to Canadian customs. So this project is often dedicated to him and to two other archaeologists who helped me, Selma Al-Radi and then Dr. Sam Paley, who was the one who introduced me to Dr. George. And so I feel a commitment, to these people, because the artifacts are not just the artifacts. The artifacts carry within the prominence of their history, but also like the conversations and the voices that have entered into what really is a kind of continued storytelling.